it's genuinely so boring that I think he was trying to I think he was trying to end my life via boredom so that the lack of oxygen wouldn't kill me, the lack of interesting things happening would kill me.
For some reason, a weird trend on Book Talk these days of people saying that Lord of the Rings is overrated and overhyped.
Pretty much every one-star review for The Lord of the Rings gives it 1 star because they say that it's just boring. So, pretty much every single 1-star review for The Lord of the Rings, I'll say 90% of 1-star reviews for The Lord of the Rings give it 1 star because they say that it's boring and slow paced. And not only do just reviews online say this, but a lot of people that I know have actually said this to me as well, that they think The Lord of the Rings is just boring and slow paced, there's too much walking, there's too much talking, and I just wanted to talk about that in this video. I suppose that in the end this is more a matter of opinion, but I still really wanted to talk about it. So my first point on why you shouldn't say The Lord of the Rings is terrible just because you think it's boring is because The Lord of the Rings is 3 books, but Tolkien initially intended for The Lord of the Rings to be one gigantic book, but the publishers thought that it would be much too expensive to print a book of that size. So the publishers had to split the book into 3 books, and that's why The Lord of the Rings is a trilogy. But Tolkien initially intended it to be just one gigantic book. And if you read a 1,000 plus page book, you're not going to expect the first 150 or 200 pages to be super fast paced and thrilling. And yes, The Lord of the Rings does start out very slow paced. In the first book, especially the first half of the first book, there's a lot of walking, a lot of really long-winded scenery descriptions, a lot of talking. There's the Council of Elrond, which is a chapter of them just talking for 30 or 40 pages. It starts out very slow-paced, but again, it was intended to be a 1,000-page book, and you're not going to expect the first quarter of a 1,000-page book to be really fast-paced. I feel like there has, and it's really sad to see this because it seems like there's a certain expectation among many readers of today, especially those who spend a lot of time on social media and those who read thrillers and really fast-paced fantasy novels. There's a certain expectation among readers today for a book to immediately grab their attention and just hold them through the entire story, gripping the edge of their seat in order for it to be a good book. There's an expectation for a story, especially a fantasy story, to have a lot of action on it, to grab your attention immediately. But that's not what The Lord of the Rings is about. A good story isn't comprised of simply how well it manages to grab your attention, how much action there is, or whatnot. For me personally, I love every second of The Lord of the Rings. I love the pages and pages where the characters are just walking through a forest, and I love the scenery descriptions. They're so poetic and vivid and really plant a very vivid picture in my mind of what this world looks like. It also is so realistic. Like, if you're going on a really long journey across the entire continent, there's gonna be a lot of walking. And this is part of what makes The Lord of the Rings so realistic, is the fact that not every second is action-packed and thrilling, but it's also realistic. The journey takes a long time. The characters do a lot of walking and a lot of talking. And it really makes it seem believable and makes me feel like I'm there. Like, it's a long journey. Of course, not every second of it is going to be action-packed. And I feel like with certain readers today, especially a lot of readers on social media, um, people today have very short attention spans. A lot of people read books just because they want to be entertained, and reading books is not a bad thing. Books are written primarily for entertaining the reader, particularly fantasy books, but there's an expectation among many readers of today for a book to give them just entertainment. A lot of readers today just want entertainment out of a book. They want entertainment more than anything else in books. Another thing is, pretty much everyone who says that The Lord of the Rings is boring has read a quarter or maybe half of the first book, and you can't write off the entire series as boring just because you read maybe half of the first book and it was really slow paced. I have not heard a single person who's read the entire Lord of the Rings say that it's boring. And I first read The Lord of the Rings when I was just 7 years old. And, as with any other young boy of my age at the time, I really liked action and stories. And I thought that a story wasn't exciting at all unless there was action in it. But I was never once bored while reading The Lord of the Rings, even through the parts of the book where they're just walking and walking through a forest for pages on end. I still somehow enjoyed it. I loved the scenery descriptions. I thought they were poetic and vivid and made the world and the story seem so much more believable. I even loved all the parts where the characters were just talking for 10 pages, 20 pages, 30 pages, because I was so interested in what they were talking about and I wanted to know more about the world. And there are some one-star reviews for it that I've read and some people that I've met who say that half of the book is just walking, but they haven't even read half the book, so I don't know how they can really say that. Not only that, but there are exciting moments in The Lord of the Rings, even in the first half of the first book, which is very slow-paced. There's the Barrow-wights, there's the Black Riders, there's the whole ordeal at the Prancing Pony with the Black Riders invading, the Hobbits meeting Strider. How could anyone logically say that that is boring? I can understand why people would think the walking segments and the characters just talking for pages on end would be boring, but who would think that this is boring? The first book is amazing. All of The Lord of the Rings is amazing, but the first book is definitely the slowest paced of all the Lord of the Rings books. Most of the people who say The Lord of the Rings is boring have read half of the first book, and they just DNF it because they say it's just so boring. Like, look at this. This is my copy of The Lord of the Rings that has all 3 books put into one book, one gigantic book, which is how Tolkien originally intended it. And most readers who say that it's boring, on average, read about this much of the book. If there's a book this big, you wouldn't expect this first bit of it to be really fast-paced. And I also wanted to say that in Tolkien's foreword to The Lord of the Rings, he actually addressed this because a lot of people thought that it was boring, and Tolkien actually talked about this, and I really want to read this here. Tolkien says, "Some who have read the book, or at any rate have reviewed it," I love that he adds, "or at any rate have reviewed it," because I get this. I've read some reviews for The Lord of the Rings where I don't feel like the reviewer has actually read the book. So I just think it's really funny that he added in that detail. He says, "Some who have read the book, or at any rate have reviewed it, have found it boring, absurd, or contemptible. And I have no cause to complain, since I have similar opinions of their works, or of the kinds of writing that they evidently prefer." I I just think that's hilarious that Tolkien actually addressed this in his foreword to The Lord of the Rings, and how he addressed it is absolutely hilarious. But yes, I respect your opinion if you think that The Lord of the Rings is boring or slow-paced. Lord of the Rings isn't for everyone, but this is just my opinion on it, and why I think people shouldn't give The Lord of the Rings negative reviews just because they found it to be a bit boring. People these days have very short attention span. Our brains are very overstimulated, especially those who will scroll through like YouTube shorts and Instagram reels. But I just want to say, a book doesn't need to immediately grab your attention to be a good book. I love how you can slowly savor the story. I love the poetic language of the descriptions. I think the walking segments are super interesting. I love all the conversations that the characters have. I find them to be very interesting, and I think they reflect a lot of the characters as well. And the way Tolkien writes dialogue is so genius. If a certain character spoke, and Tolkien never told you which character spoke, you would immediately know which character was speaking just based on their speech patterns. And I think this is really genius, the way Tolkien did this, the way he created his world. And I think he intentionally didn't make it really action-packed and fast-paced. But again, despite very many people saying today that The Lord of the Rings is too boring and too slow-paced for them, The Lord of the Rings still stands as one of the greatest works of literature of all time. As time wears on, attention spans will shorten significantly, even more short than they have been now. And this is already happening. Books and movies are getting shorter, there's more action in them. I don't think that the popularity of The Lord of the Rings will ever decrease. It truly is an amazing work of literature and one of my favorites. Even as a 7-year-old boy reading it for the first time who loves stories with lots of action in it, I still loved The Lord of the Rings, and it still managed to grab my attention despite there not being a lot of action at the beginning of the story. Anyway, that is just my opinion on why I think The Lord of the Rings is not boring and why I think it's invalid to write off the whole thing as boring. If you've read maybe a quarter of the first book and think that it's too boring, just push on. It gets way more exciting even if you do think that it's boring. And I've not heard a single person who's read the entire Lord of the Rings say that it's boring. So keep on going. It's an incredible, beautiful story of true value, something which is lost on most stories written today. But thank you so much for watching this video. Please subscribe if you want to hear me read aloud my short novella called The Worst of Times. It is a science fiction story about a man from the year 2025 who builds a time machine and travels into the year 2098. I'll be reading it aloud to you once I get 5,000 subscribers, which I am very close, extremely close. So please subscribe if you're interested in that. But thank you for watching this video, and for now, farewell.